The year was 2156, and humanity had not been free for 67 years. When the first human ships had traveled beyond the solar system in 2089, they had expected to find wonders. Instead, they found the Dominion waiting for them with weapons pointed at Earth. They were not alone. They led a coalition of 12 ancient species who called themselves the Elder Races. These aliens had watched humanity through their long-range observation machines for centuries. They had seen the world wars. They had seen the nuclear bombs dropped on cities. They had seen humans kill each other over land, over religion, over resources. The Elder Races decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom among the stars. The Treaty of Compliance was not a deal between equals. It was a set of rules forced upon humanity at gunpoint. Under this treaty, humans could not build weapons stronger than simple bullets. They could not create energy shields or powerful missiles. Their largest ships could only be small frigates, barely bigger than the cargo vessels that carried supplies between colonies. Humanity was allowed to settle on only 17 star systems, all within a region the aliens called the Quarantine Zone. Every single expansion request had been by the Dominion Council. Admiral Cole stood on the observation deck of Earth Defense Station Vigilance. She was 54 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that spoke of decades of worry. Through the massive window, she watched an enforcement cruiser glide past. The alien ship was beautiful in a cold way, its chrome surface reflecting the distant sun. It was also a reminder of everything humanity had lost. Had been born under alien rule. Her grandmother had died in a detention camp. Her father had spent his entire life dreaming of stars that humans were forbidden to reach. She had grown up knowing that somewhere above her, alien eyes were always watching. Lieutenant Danny Marsh walked up behind her. He was young, only 28, with red hair and a face full of freckles. He had been aide for 3 years, and she had come to trust him completely. But today, his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly as he held out a tablet. "Admiral, we have a situation in the 442 colony," he said quietly. Took the tablet and watched the footage. Ground troops in their silver armor were dragging human colonists from their homes. Men, women, and children were being thrown into the muddy streets. The official reason was a mining dispute. The colonists had apparently extracted minerals that were classified as strategic resources without permission. "How many dead?" asked. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. 17 confirmed, including 4 children. On the screen, a soldier struck an old man who had fallen to his knees. The old man's white hair was stained with blood. Around him, other colonists were forced to watch, their faces filled with helpless rage. Had seen footage like this before. Everyone had. They did not hide their cruelty. They wanted humanity to see it. They wanted humans to remember what happened to those who stepped out of line. "They are testing us again," said. Danny nodded slowly. "Or they have stopped caring whether we pass the test." Handed back the tablet. 67 years. That was how long humanity had bowed and scraped and apologized for the crime of existing. That was how long they had watched their people be beaten, imprisoned, and killed for minor violations of rules they had never agreed to follow. The Elder Races called humans dangerous, but they had taken away every tool humanity had to be dangerous. All that remained was the anger buried deep but never forgotten. What the aliens did not understand was that anger was a tool too, and it was one that no treaty could take away. "Get me a secure channel to Admiral Hector Vance at Lunar Command," said. "Use the Black Protocol encryption." Danny hesitated. "Admiral, that encryption is only for emergency situations." "This is an emergency. It has been an emergency for 67 years. We have just been too afraid to admit it." Danny still did not move. "What are you planning?" Turned from the window and looked at her young aide. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw something else. Hope. the desperate, dangerous hope of someone who had lived their entire life in chains and suddenly saw a chance to be free. "Have you ever heard of Ghost Protocol?" she asked. Danny's face went even paler. "That is just a rumor, a story people tell in bars when they have had too much to drink." "It is not a rumor. It is real. For 40 years, humanity has been building in secret, hidden shipyards in asteroid fields, weapons factories disguised as mining operations, training programs hidden within civilian organizations. We have been preparing for the day when we would finally fight back." "But the treaty inspections," Danny protested. "The satellites, how could we hide something that big?" "By being patient, by being clever, by letting them believe that we were broken," smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They think they know everything about us. They have watched us for so long that they believe they understand us, but they only see what we allow them to see." Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "If we do this and fail, they will destroy us, not just defeat us. They will wipe humanity from existence." "Yes," agreed. "That is the risk. But I want you to think about something, Danny. Think about those children on. Think about your own parents, your friends, everyone you have ever known. Now ask yourself this question. Is the life we have now really worth living? Is survival without freedom actually survival at all?" Danny did not answer. He did not need to. The answer was written on his face. "Get me that channel," said, "and then wake up the Ghost Protocol team. It is time for humanity to stop being afraid." Danny nodded and turned to leave. At the door he stopped and looked back. "Admiral, whatever happens, I want you to know that I am with you, all the way." Felt something loosen in her chest. It might have been fear, it might have been hope. She could not tell the difference anymore. "Thank you, Danny. Now go. We have a war to start." As her aide left, turned back to the window. The cruiser had moved on, continuing its patrol around Earth like a shark circling wounded prey. But sharks could be killed, empires could fall, and humanity, for all its flaws, had never been good at staying down. The chains were about to break, and when they did, the galaxy would finally learn what it meant to take humanity seriously. The treaty was torn apart on a Tuesday morning. It began at exactly 6 o'clock Earth Standard Time. Across 12 different star systems, 17 human cargo vessels suddenly stopped responding to communication signals. The alien patrol ships sent warning messages, then threats, then finally moved to intercept the silent vessels. When they boarded the cargo ships, they found the holds completely empty. There was nothing inside except for a single message beacon, floating in the darkness and broadcasting on every frequency the aliens used. The message was simple. The Treaty of Compliance is dissolved. Humanity will no longer submit. We advise all non-human vessels to withdraw from the quarantine zone immediately. You have been warned. Within minutes, the message had spread across the entire galaxy. Alien news networks interrupted their regular broadcasts. Dominion military commanders scrambled to understand what was happening. On 100 different worlds, species who had ruled the stars for thousands of years stared at their screens in disbelief. The humans, the primitive and broken humans, had just declared war on the most powerful alliance in galactic history. Admiral Hector Vance watched the chaos unfold from his command center. The room was buried 3 miles beneath the surface of Earth's moon, hidden behind layers of rock and metal that no alien scanner had ever penetrated. Hector was 71 years old. His face looked like it had been carved from stone, all hard angles and deep lines. His eyes were the color of winter ice, and they had seen too many friends die under alien rule. "They are mobilizing," reported Captain Lisa Grant. She was a small woman with short black hair and fingers that moved across her control panel faster than most people could think. 6 battle groups are heading toward Earth. They are bringing their void carriers out of their docks. The collective is activating their home system defenses. "How long until the first ships reach Earth?" Hector asked. 18 hours, sir." Hector nodded slowly. 18 hours. It seemed like such a short time, but humanity had been preparing for this moment for 4 decades. Every cargo ship that crossed between human colonies had a hidden compartment filled with weapons. Every mining station had launch tubes concealed behind fake walls. Every colony that had suffered under cruelty had been quietly training its citizens in combat tactics that the elder races had forgotten long ago. The aliens had grown comfortable in their power. They had not faced a real threat in centuries. They had forgotten what it was like to fight an enemy who had nothing left to lose. "Begin Operation Prometheus," Hector ordered. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding in his chest. "And may whatever gods are listening forgive us for what we are about to do." Across human space, the hidden war machine came to life. Shipyard doors that had been disguised as asteroid mining facilities slid open, revealing the vessels that had been built in secret over 4 decades. These ships were nothing like the small frigates the treaty allowed. They were massive, bristling with weapons that humanity was never supposed to possess. Their hulls were painted black, designed to blend into the darkness of space. On Earth, defense platforms that everyone believed were simple communication satellites revealed their true nature. Hidden panels opened to show weapon batteries capable of firing energy beams that could cut through shields like paper through water. Underground bunkers released swarms of drones that had been waiting in storage for years. Commander Grace stood on the bridge of the Defiant, the first of the new Titan-class battleships. The ship was enormous, nearly a mile long, with enough firepower to take on an entire squadron. Grace was 38 years old, with brown hair cut short for practicality and eyes that never seemed to rest. She had 2 young sons back on Earth, ages 7 and 9. She had not seen them in 3 months. She might never see them again. But when she thought about the world her sons would inherit if humanity did nothing, she knew that any price was worth paying. "All stations report ready," said her tactical officer, Lieutenant Chris Palmer. He was young and nervous, fresh from the academy. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "Enemy fleet dropping out of hyperspace near Jupiter," reported the sensor operator. "Counting 15 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, and approximately 200 support vessels." Grace felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. They had sent an overwhelming force, expecting to crush any resistance quickly and brutally. They did not know what was waiting for them. "All batteries target the lead dreadnought," Grace ordered. "Fire on my command." The bridge was silent except for the hum of the engines and the soft beeping of the control panels. Every officer knew that the next few seconds would change everything. Either humanity would prove that it could fight, or they would all die in the cold darkness of space. Grace watched the enemy ships grow larger on the main screen. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their silver hulls gleaming in the reflected light of Jupiter. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. "Fire," Grace said. The Defiant shook as its main guns released their first volley. Beams of concentrated energy crossed the void in less than a second, striking the lead dreadnought directly in its center mass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the enemy ship's shields flickered, flashed, and collapsed. The second volley punched through the hull like a fist through glass. The dreadnought exploded in a ball of white fire. Across the human fleet, other ships were firing as well. The formation, caught completely off guard, tried to reorganize. Their commanders screamed orders, demanding to know how the humans had obtained such weapons. But there was no time for answers. The second dreadnought was already burning. Then the third. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the space around Jupiter was filled with wreckage. 3 dreadnoughts had been completely destroyed. 7 more were damaged so badly they could barely move. The surviving alien ships were retreating at full speed, sending panicked messages back to the Dominion Council. "They lied to us," the messages said. "The humans are not primitive. They are not broken. Send reinforcements immediately." On the bridge of the Defiant, Grace allowed herself to breathe. They had won the first battle. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The Dominion would return with more ships, more weapons, more determination. The war for humanity's freedom had just started, and it would be long and bloody before it was over. "Damage report," she ordered. "Hull damage on decks 7 through 12. 32 casualties, 8 confirmed dead." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. 8 dead. 8 people who had trusted her, who had followed her orders, who had given their lives so that humanity could have a chance at freedom. She would remember their names. She would remember all of them. "Set course for Earth," she said. "We need to resupply and prepare for the next wave." As the Defiant turned toward home, Grace looked out at the burning remains of the fleet. For 67 years, the elder races had believed that humanity was beaten. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On every human world, people gathered in the streets to celebrate. They laughed and cried and held each other, unable to believe what had happened. For the first time in 67 years, they had fought back against their oppressors and won. The impossible had become real. But Admiral Cole knew that the celebration could not last long. She stood in the war room of the Vigilance, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every known enemy fleet. The Dominion had been surprised once. They would not be surprised again. "They are pulling back to regroup," reported Captain Danny Marsh. His voice was tired but excited. Like everyone else, he had not slept since the battle began. "Our intelligence suggests they are consolidating their forces at 3 staging points." "How long until they are ready to attack again?" asked. "Estimates vary. Some analysts say 2 weeks, others say a month." Studied the map carefully. The Dominion controlled thousands of star systems and had resources that humanity could not hope to match. If this became a long war of attrition, where both sides simply threw soldiers at each other until one side ran out, humanity would lose. They did not have the numbers or the supplies to outlast an enemy that had been building its strength for thousands of years. "We cannot wait for them to come to us," she said finally. "We need to strike first, hit them where they feel safe, and never let them rest." "That is not traditional warfare," Danny pointed out. "Traditional warfare will get us killed. We need to fight smart, not fair." Over the next 3 months, humanity launched a campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of meeting the Dominion fleets in large battles, human forces scattered across enemy territory in small, fast groups. They attacked supply convoys, destroyed communication stations, and sabotaged military bases. They struck without warning and disappeared before the enemy could respond. The commanders did not know how to handle this kind of fighting. Their military doctrine was based on large fleet engagements where superior numbers always won. They had forgotten how to fight an enemy that refused to play by the rules. Even worse for the Dominion, the human rebellion was inspiring others. On worlds that had been conquered by the elder races long ago, oppressed populations began to rise up. Species that had been quiet for centuries suddenly found their courage. They saw that the mighty Dominion could be hurt, and they wanted to do some hurting themselves. Counselor In stood before the Dominion Council in their great chamber on the capital world. His 4 eyes were dim with exhaustion and worry. Around him, representatives of the 12 elder species argued and shouted at each other, their usual dignity forgotten in the face of crisis. "The humans are not fighting according to proper warfare protocols," In said, trying to make himself heard over the noise. "They target civilian infrastructure. They use tricks and lies. They recruit rebels from populations we believed were. This is not war. This is chaos." "Then crush the chaos," demanded Counselor Myra of her crystalline body pulsed with angry light. "Use overwhelming force. Destroy their planets. End this before it spreads further." "With what resources?" In asked bitterly. "They have drawn us into 1,000 small fights across 300 systems. Every time we gather our strength in one place, they attack somewhere else. They are bleeding us dry." The council continued to argue, but no one could agree on a solution. Some wanted total war, the complete destruction of human civilization. Others feared that such brutality would only inspire more rebellions. A few, speaking quietly in corners, wondered if perhaps they had made a terrible mistake when they first put humanity in chains. In a small room away from the main chamber, Counselor Thane of the Collective met secretly with a human envoy. His name was Peter Marshall, and he was 46 years old with gray at his temples and scars on his face. His right arm was a mechanical prosthetic, a replacement for the limb he had lost in a prison camp. The metal arm was stronger than flesh had ever been. "Your people fight well," Thane admitted. His voice was soft and musical, the natural sound of the species. "But you must know you cannot win. The Dominion has reserves you cannot imagine, fleets you have never seen. If we commit everything, we will overwhelm you eventually." Peter smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "Maybe, but how long will that take? A year, 10 years, 100? And how many of your people will die in that time? How many worlds will burn?" "You would accept mutual destruction." "We would accept anything over slavery. That is something your council never understood about humans. We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees." Thane was silent for a long moment. He was old for his species, nearly 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched the Dominion grow from a small alliance into the greatest power the galaxy had ever known. And now, for the first time, he wondered if he was watching it begin to crumble. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "What would end this war?" "Freedom," Peter said simply. "Real freedom. The right to govern ourselves, to travel where we wish, to build what we choose. Remove the chains and the war ends tomorrow." "The Council will never agree to that. They are too proud." "Then they will learn humility, one dead ship at a time." Peter stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Counselor, I want you to understand something. We do not hate your people. We do not want to destroy the Dominion or conquer your worlds. All we ever wanted was to be left alone, to find our own path among the stars. Your ancestors chose to put us in a cage instead. Now you are discovering that the creature in the cage has claws." After Peter left, Thane sat alone in the darkness for a long time. He thought about the war, about the death toll that grew higher every day, about the colonies burning on both sides. He thought about pride and fear and the terrible price of both. The next morning, he sent a secret message to Admiral Cole. It contained coordinates for a meeting place and 3 words that would change the course of the war. "We should talk." Received the message in her quarters aboard the Vigilance. She read it 3 times, looking for tricks or traps. Finding none, she made a decision that would either save humanity or doom it completely. She agreed to meet. The secret talks between Cole and Counselor Thane had barely begun when disaster struck. The High Command, desperate to end the rebellion before it could spread further, launched a massive assault on the human colony of New Haven. New Haven was special to humanity. It had been one of the first colonies established after the Treaty of Compliance, built on a world that the Dominion considered worthless. The settlers had transformed barren rock into green fields and shining cities through decades of hard work. 2 million people called New Haven home. It was proof that humanity could create beauty even in chains. They sent 50 warships. The colony's defenses held for 3 hours. The small garrison fought with everything they had, knowing that help could not arrive in time. When their ships were destroyed and their ground batteries ran out of ammunition, they fought with rifles. When the rifles were empty, they fought with knives and bare hands. They did not surrender. They did not beg. They simply died, trying to give the civilian population time to reach the underground shelters. It was not enough. The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, New Haven was a graveyard. The beautiful cities were rubble. The green fields were black ash. Of the 2 million people who had lived there, fewer than 400,000 survived, huddled in shelters that had been built for a fraction of that number. Sergeant Bate Carter was among the survivors. Before the war, she had been a schoolteacher. She had taught children about the stars, about the history of human exploration, about the dream of one day traveling freely among the galaxies. Her classroom had been in the basement of a school building, which was the only reason she was still alive. Bate crawled through the rubble, searching for any students who might have sheltered in the building. Her hands were bleeding from digging through broken concrete. Dust filled her lungs with every breath. Above her, the sky was dark with smoke and the distant flames of still-burning fires. She found 7 children in what remained of the basement shelter. 2 of them were still breathing. A girl named Sophie, 8 years old, and a boy named, who was only 6. Bate carried them out one at a time, her body screaming with exhaustion but refusing to stop. Across the human territories, news of the New Haven massacre spread quickly. But instead of breaking humanity's spirit, it hardened it into something sharper than steel. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers. Factories that were already running at full capacity somehow found ways to produce more weapons, more ships, more supplies. Scientists who had been working on defensive systems switched their focus to creating weapons that would make the pay for every drop of human blood they had spilled. Admiral Hector Vance addressed humanity in a broadcast that reached every colony, every ship, every hidden base. "They believe that cruelty will break us," he said. His voice was calm but filled with cold fury. "They have not studied our history well enough. Every scar they give us is a reminder of why we fight. Every grave they fill is a debt we will collect. We did not start this war, but by everything we hold sacred, we will end it." The counteroffensive began 3 days later. Commander Grace led the assault on the shipyards at Nexus Prime. This was the largest military construction facility in all of Dominion space, the place where the mightiest warships were built. Destroying it would cripple the enemy's ability to replace their losses. The human fleet jumped into the system under cover of a massive electronic warfare attack that blinded the enemy sensors. By the time they realized what was happening, Grace's ships were already among them, firing at point-blank range where their superior firepower could not miss. The battle was brutal. Reinforcements arrived within the first hour, trapping the human fleet between the shipyards and the relief force. Grace refused to retreat. She pushed her ships forward, accepting terrible losses to reach the shipyard's power core. "All vessels, focus fire on grid coordinate 773, she ordered. Her voice was hoarse from hours of shouting commands. Around her, the bridge was filled with smoke and the screams of wounded crew members. "We take out the reactor. We take out everything." The Defiant shook as another enemy salvo struck its hull. Warning lights flashed across every console. Damage reports flooded in faster than anyone could process them. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 9, reported Lieutenant Chris Palmer. Blood was running down his face from a cut on his forehead, but he refused to leave his station. Casualty reports still coming in. "Keep firing," Grace ordered. "We did not come here to run." The concentrated firepower of the surviving human ships punched through the shipyard's shields, then through its armor, then into its reactor core. The explosion was visible from orbit around the system's outer planets. The shipyard, along with the dozens of warships still docked inside, was completely destroyed. But the victory came at a terrible cost. 37 human vessels had been lost, including the Defiant itself, which had taken a direct hit during the final assault. Grace survived only because her first officer, a quiet man named Henderson, had physically dragged her to an escape pod when the bridge began to collapse. Did not make it to a pod himself. On the rescue ship that picked up the survivors, Grace stood in the medical bay watching the doctors work on her wounded crew. Chris Palmer had lost both his legs below the knee. The ship's navigator, Tony, was in a coma from which the doctors were not sure he would ever wake. Ensign Maria Santos had burns covering most of her body and would need months of treatment to recover. Captain Danny Marsh arrived to debrief her. He looked as tired as she felt, his eyes red from lack of sleep and unshed tears. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. Grace watched a medic holding the hand of a dying officer, speaking soft words of comfort in the young man's final moments. She thought about Henderson, who had saved her life at the cost of his own. She thought about all the friends she had lost, all the people who would never go home again. "I do not know," she admitted. "Ask me when it is over." The war had already lasted 8 months. Intelligence suggested that the Dominion was finally beginning to waver. The loss of Nexus Prime had been a devastating blow. The ongoing rebellions on dozens of conquered worlds were stretching their resources thin. Secret communications intercepted by human intelligence showed that some council members were beginning to argue for peace. But Cole knew that the fighting was not over yet. The Still controlled the military, and they would not surrender easily. More battles would be fought. More people would die. She looked at the casualty reports from Nexus Prime and felt the weight of every name on the list pressing down on her shoulders. This was the price of freedom. This was what it cost to break the chains. She could only hope that, when the war finally ended, the survivors would agree that the price had been worth paying. The war ended on the anniversary of the day humanity had torn up the treaty. It was not a dramatic moment with ceremonies and cheering crowds. There was no signing of documents before the galaxy's media networks. Instead, Counselor In simply appeared via holographic communication in Admiral Cole's quarters aboard the Vigilance. His 4 eyes were dim and tired. His voice, once commanding, now sounded like that of a very old being who had seen too much death. "We acknowledge your independence," he said. "The Treaty of Compliance is void. Humanity is free to govern its own affairs, to expand to whatever star systems it can claim, to develop whatever technologies it chooses. We ask only for peace." Studied the alien's face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. She found nothing except exhaustion and defeat. "Why now?" she asked. "Why surrender today when you refused to consider peace for so long?" In's eyes closed briefly. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been shame. "Because we are losing. Not just the war against your people, but everything we built over thousands of years. The rebellion you started has spread to species we believed were completely under our control. Our economy is collapsing under the strain of fighting on so many fronts at once. Our own populations are turning against the Council, demanding that we end the bloodshed." He paused, then continued in a quieter voice. "You have not just defeated us in battle, Admiral. You have broken the idea that the Dominion is unbeatable. That idea was the foundation of our entire civilization. Without it, we are falling apart." Let his words sink in. For 67 years, the Dominion had ruled the galaxy through a combination of military power and the belief that no one could challenge them. Humanity had proven that belief wrong, and once one species showed that the Emperor had no clothes, others found the courage to look for themselves. "We accept your surrender," said finally, "but understand this clearly. We will never forget what was done to our people. We will never allow ourselves to be put in chains again. If anyone or otherwise ever tries to subjugate humanity in the future, our response will be swift and absolute. There will be no second treaty. There will be no second chance." "I understand." "One more thing, Counselor. The colonies your people destroyed, the civilians your soldiers murdered, the generations of freedom you stole from us. You will pay reparations to every human world that suffered under your rule. You will acknowledge your crimes publicly. And you will live with the knowledge that the species you dismissed as primitive animals brought your empire to its knees." In bowed his head in acceptance. "It will be done." The communication ended. Sat alone in her quarters for a long time after the screen went dark. She thought about her grandmother, who had died in a camp without ever knowing that her granddaughter would one day face down the leaders of the Dominion. She thought about her father, who had spent his whole life dreaming of stars he was forbidden to visit. She thought about every human who had suffered and sacrificed and died so that this moment could exist. They had won, but what had they become in the process of winning? The question haunted her. 3 months after the war's end, humanity held its first truly free election in 67 years. The government that emerged was not perfect. It was divided by old arguments and new fears, struggling to rebuild a society that had been shaped by oppression for generations. But it was human. Every law, every leader, every decision was made by humans for humans. No alien oversight. No outside approval required. Commander Grace retired from the military. She had given enough, lost enough. The nightmares still came every night, filled with fire and screaming and the faces of friends who had died under her command. She returned to Earth, to a small house by the ocean that she had bought with her pension, and spent her days teaching children how to sail small boats on the water. The children who came to her lessons would grow up in a galaxy without chains. That thought was the only thing that made the memories bearable. Admiral Hector Vance died peacefully in his sleep 6 months after the war ended. He was 72 years old. His body was buried on the moon, in a cemetery that overlooked Earth, with full military honors. Thousands of people attended the funeral, including many who had never met him but wanted to pay their respects to the man who had helped set humanity free. His gravestone bore a simple message: he never stopped believing. Cole remained in uniform, but she changed her mission. The defense fleet became the exploration fleet, its weapons systems replaced with scientific equipment. She wanted to see what was out there, beyond the boundaries that the Dominion had drawn. She wanted humanity to reach for the stars not because they were running from anything, but because reaching was simply what humans did. On the first anniversary of freedom, a monument was unveiled on Earth. It stood in the center of the largest city, 300 feet tall, a simple column of black stone. Carved into its surface were the names of every human who had died under Dominion rule and every human who had died in the war for liberation. There were millions of names. Reading them all would take days. At the base of the monument, carved in letters 10 feet high, were 4 words that captured everything humanity had learned about itself over 67 years of chains and 16 months of war. We are still here. Bate Carter, the teacher who had survived New Haven, brought Sophie, and to see the monument on the day it was unveiled. The 2 children she had rescued from the rubble were 11 and 9 now, healthy and healing, though they still woke up screaming sometimes from nightmares about the bombardment. Sophie looked up at the towering column of black stone, reading the names carved into its surface. "Are we safe now?" she asked quietly. Bate knelt down to look the girl in the eyes. She thought about everything humanity had been through, everything they had sacrificed, everything they had lost and found along the way. "Yes," she said, "we are safe, and we are free, and no one will ever take that away from us again." Sophie nodded slowly, accepting the answer with the simple trust of a child. Then she took Bates' hand in one of hers and his hand in the other, and together they stood before the monument in silence, remembering those who had died so that they could live. Above them, the sky was clear and blue and full of stars, stars that humanity could finally reach, stars that belonged to everyone now. The galaxy had taken humanity seriously at last, and nothing would ever be the same again.